Welcome everyone to the latest episode of a series I like to call History Speaks. Now, on today's show, I'm delighted to meet an author, researcher, a seamstress, and a popular West Country speaker. Now, in 2021, she wrote her first book, A Woman of Noble Wit, and followed that up in 2024 with her tale about the Dartington Bride. So if you're a fan of Tudor history, love historical fiction, or even Devon's history, this is the place to be. So please give a warm welcome to my guest this week, Rosemary Griggs. Hi, Rosemary. How are you?
Hi, John. Lovely to meet you, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today.
Oh, I'm looking forward to this one, Rosemary. Anything south and warm and like that, it's good in my book.
I can't get you warm, really. We're down in Devon. It's a miserable morning, but at least the rain stopped.
All right, well, that's good. Anyway, now normally at this point, I ask a guest a question that's kind of off the cuff. However, although this is a question, it's more me being nosy and wanting to know what it was like to be a part of possibly the world's biggest archaeology programme, Time Team, when they visited Devon last year. And how did you get involved in that?
It was the most amazing experience. We had a community dig in the small town of Montgomery, and that's the town where the Champernowne families had their wonderful manor house. And I got involved because I've been researching that family for years and years, and my books centre on some of the women of that family. And they also knew that I did my costume work. So I was able to be there with the team. Gosh, what an experience it was. It was wonderful.
Was Tony Robinson wasn't there, was he?
No, not on that occasion. No, he's still involved with the programme sometimes. But lots of the characters you've met before were there. And we were there for the whole weekend. They did test pits in lots of people's gardens, discovered lots and lots about the history of Montgomery. But my particular interest was trying to locate exactly where the Champernowne's manor house was. And without giving too many secrets away, because people need to go and watch the programme, we did find some very interesting things.
Well, I will put a link to this show in that description box below. So if people want to go and watch it, they're more than welcome. One thing I wanted to ask you was, though, about that particular show.
Yep.
When they filmed you walking through as though the built, how did they do that? Did they put you up against a green screen or?
Absolutely. It was brilliant. I mean, I never thought I'd become an avatar, but there I am. I'm walking around and it's as if I'm in the building. It was just fantastic. I went down to Plymouth with some brilliant people and I had a lot of fun doing the filming. It's just an amazing experience.
It is. It was really good. I really enjoyed that. Anyway, let's get on to what you're about today and a little bit of a chat. So, how did you first become interested in history and what is your background?
Right. Well, I was very, very lucky because I went to a small primary school in a village in North Buckinghamshire, and I had the most inspirational teacher who really sort of ignited my interest in reading, first of all, and then sort of sowed the seeds of a passion for history I've had all my life. I think that the thing that really got through to me was being shown that we learn an awful lot about kings and queens and battles, but once you start to learn how people lived in the past, you really start to understand things. But then, of course, I went to the grammar school and they decided I was actually quite good at science. So I got put in the science stream and I had to drop history, which was a real disappointment for me. I went on and had a career in the civil service. So ironically, I never used that scientific background at all in my career. It's really only since I retired I've been able to return to my first love, which was history.
Fantastic. Now we know your background, or I'll rephrase this, most of your background is based in the wonderful county of Devon. So what first drew you to the 16th century women of that area?
I think the 16th century has always been a fascinating time for me. It was this explosion of learning after the printing press started to come into use, education changed, but there were so many other changes during that century. Political, social, religious changes. And a lot of people, I think, perhaps think of Devon at that time as a bit far-flung, a long way from port, maybe even a bit of a rural backwater. But there was an awful lot going on down here, and we'd been really important for generations as economically. I mean, we're very good at sheep. Sheep do very well in our climate down in Devon. It suits them. So we've been producing wool and woolen cloth and exporting it for generations. We've also had the tin coming off the moors, and that's been going out through our ports. And we've got these wonderful ports along the coast. We've got a long coastline. So, of course, we're also important to the strategic defence of the country. And that, not surprisingly, produced all these well-known Devon. I'm thinking everywhere I go on my talks, people can reel off a list of famous men of Devon. And top of the list is usually Francis Drake. I always think he's a bit of a bumptious little man, but there we are. And but we know about the men, don't we? We hear so much about men. I wanted to try and discover a bit more about the wives and the mothers and the daughters and the sisters who were carrying on, who were managing huge estates while all those chaps were going off on their explorations. And they were the glue, really, that glued together some amazing dynasties of families down in Devon. So that's why I wanted to discover what was going on for all those women.
And I can't blame you, because I've always said I think women have a far more fascinating story to tell than the men, if you like. The men,
absolutely.
The men are always there anyway, aren't they? They're always at the top of the tree, sort of thing. But when you come down a little bit and you start looking at some of the women of that time.
Well, there's a saying, history is a bit like that. It's usually his story. And I guess what I've set out to do is to tell her story. It's been fascinating. I've discovered some wonderful characters, incredible things they were doing, which are not talked about and not known about. So that's where I come from.
And that's the beauty of history. It's far more than a one. There's two sides to every story. So there's the men's side, and of course, there has to be a woman's side to it. And the women's side really struggles anyway. It always has done, like you said, through history.
I think it's really important when you're researching to sort of understand that the few records we've got left to us have always been written by someone for a purpose. So there's a need to interrogate who's written this down, why did they write it down, and what does it really tell us about what was going on.
Now, as we know, and as you've just said, Devon has a rich and layered history, and it's interesting to see how certain families played a role in shaping the region's past. Now, one name that stands out in your research is the Champernowne family. Now, we know you've studied long about the ancestry of them, but how far back have you managed to trace this Devon family?
I've actually got them back to before the Norman conquest. They are a Norman family. And in the 900s, there's a chap called Jordan de Combrenon, who was quite a big cheese in a village in Normandy called Combrenon, surprisingly. And then there's a Thomas who was fighting at the Battle of Hastings. Then they sort of seem to have gone back after the success of William in England. They seem to have gone back for 100 years or so, and then they crop up again. First of all, in North Devon, and then throughout the West Country, and they grow. And they've got a really, really clever way of increasing their status. It's one that a lot of men followed. They continued throughout the history. All the men of the family marry rich wives. And so their wealth and status really grew until by the 16th century, they're connected to some of the best known and biggest families in the whole country, leave alone the West Country.
So is the name, I guess the name Champernowne is a really old name, but does it still exist today, sort of thing? Is the people still connected?
Absolutely. In fact, I'm absolutely thrilled that I'm often in touch with the current representatives of the family who are still in Devon. They're very lovely people. And the family lived primarily in Devon for a long time. And they're still around now, yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting name as well. And one of the things when you're researching, the bane of the researcher's life, I think, is the variant spellings of that name, because it does come from the French. So you get Champernowne, you get Champernowne spelt in various different ways. You get chamber and chamber and chamberlain and all sorts of variations. It's the same family. Even one that crops up called Di Campo Arnolfi.
It is. I tried to trace a little bit of my kind of ancestry, if you like, and it's so difficult. You get to a point, and like you said, when names start to change, and it's virtually, unless you know what you're looking for, it's virtually impossible. And
and you need to be very sort of dedicated. You need to be determined, and you need challenging what you're seeing. And I mean, we're very lucky in our time because we've got online catalogues and lots of records have been digitized. But unfortunately, that also misses quite a few because the spellings have got corrupted in the digitizing process. Or whoever was writing them down, they haven't actually decided how to spell their names yet. So, it's very confusing. But I've been able to follow it through and found out a lot about these people, and what an engaging lot they were.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, of course, tracing any family history certainly uncovers some incredible stories that do pan generations, as you've just explained. And among them, one figure stands out, someone whose legacy is often overshadowed by a famous son. Now, you've written lots of Tudor connections, but let's have a look at Katherine Champernowne, who was the mother of Sir Walter Raleigh. So what do we know about her?
Well, she's an amazing woman of Devon, and that's really what set me off on my sort of voyage of discovery into the Champernowne's history, because I came across her and I thought, goodness me, we don't know anything about this woman. We know about her son. He's very well known. She was extraordinary because she was lived all her life in Devon. She married twice. She had 5 sons who survived childhood, 8 or 9 children altogether. And she had this incredibly talented son that we all know about, Sir Walter. But not only that, in her first marriage, she produced Sir Humphrey Gilbert, who was another explorer. He was a talented man. He wrote a treatise on the search for the Northwest Passage. And he also came up with some incredible ideas for an academy for young gentlemen that was a bit like the forerunner for the Devonport Naval College. It was never taken up by Queen Elizabeth, that one, but he was obviously quite right. So I've got this woman who, with 2 different husbands, she produced these incredibly clever and talented in all sorts of ways, in some ways flawed as well. But she produced these sons that we know about. I thought there must be something here that is making her able to do that. So that's really where the story started.
So when you said she's obviously from Devon and one of her sons was Walter Raleigh, was the place she lived like on the coast and sort of thing for him to obviously become interested in, sailing and whatever else that he did, exploring?
Down in Montgomery, where I was mentioning where I was with the Time Team people. And that's where the family were based, which is a little bit inland, but not far from the sea in South Hams. She then married a chap called Gilbert, and lived actually not on the coast, but in quite a favourable position on the River Dart. It's a place that lots of people know well today because the site of the Gilbert Mansion House there on the Dart is actually now the site of Agatha Christie's holiday home, which is very well known to lots and lots of people. So that had a deep water anchorage. The Gilberts, like the Champernownes, were involved in shipping enterprises. So she had that background from her first marriage. The second marriage is to Walter Raleigh Sr., and they lived then at a small village called East Budleigh, place that we now call Hayes Barton. It was a farm, really, almost a come down in terms of status for Catherine. But Walter Raleigh Sr. was also involved heavily in shipping. Funnily enough, in those times, for a long time, the River Otter down in East Devon had a port quite a long way inland, but it gradually silted up. So he was running his ships later on out of Exmouth. Bit of a pirate, people will say to you, our Walter Senior. He's a fascinating character. Really enjoyed unearthing his secrets and following his time. And he's Catherine's second husband and the father of Sir Walter, and also another son, Carew Raleigh, who was also a sea captain and a soldier, not in quite the same way a courtier as Walter became.
Is it fair to say then that the family was a shipping family, if you like? They all kind of...
Absolutely, and I think that's a common thread through lots and lots of the Devon families. They all dabbled in shipping. Over the years, the Gilberts and the Champernownes, if we go back to the 15th century, they had a business they were running together. They were actually shipping pilgrims out through the port of Dartmouth down to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. And on the return voyage, they picked up cargoes of wine and salt and such like things and brought them back in. So they were heavily involved in exporting, importing, shipping, right from way, way back.
So it's a family business then, isn't it, really?
Absolutely,
it is. Now, Catherine's story offers an interesting look into the family connections, as you've mentioned there, that shaped some of the most well-known figures of the era. But she's not the only remarkable woman whose legacy has ties to Devon, and there's another figure whose journey took a very different path. Now, apart from the Champernowne family, you've also found information that a French Huguenot woman spent much of her life in Devon. What can you tell us about her?
Well, she's actually very much connected to the Champernowne family. And as I said, I was really determined to tell the stories of the women of Devon when I started out. And Katherine was the first. My novel, A Woman of Noble Wit, is her story. After that one came out, I was looking to the next woman to write about. And I got a bit distracted for a bit because Katherine had a brother. His name is Arthur. And he became Sir Arthur Champernowne, the first of that name to live at Dartington Hall in Devon. Now, Dartington's somewhere I spend a lot of time. It's the most wonderful 14th century manor house. It was built by the half-brother of King Richard II, John Holland, and in the 1550s, Sir Arthur Champernowne made at Dartington his home. He's an incredible figure. He was Vice Admiral of the Fleet of the West, and he did lots to support the Huguenots who were being persecuted in France at that time. But the trouble is, Arthur, he's a man, and I really didn't want to tell a man story. So although I got enormous time for Arthur, I looked for a woman whose story I could tell, and I lighted on his daughter-in-law. She is a woman called Lady Gabrielle Roberta Montgomery, and she was a French Huguenot. She was actually the daughter of the Count of Montgomery, a chap called Gabriel de Lorge. And he had the misfortune to be the man who actually accidentally killed the King of France in a jousting accident. Quite dramatically, in 1559, there was a huge celebration going on in France, 2 royal weddings. They had a joust. King Henry II was about 40, and he was determined he would show that he could ride out with the best. Gabriel de Lorge was captain of his Scots Guards. That was an elite regiment that accompanied the king everywhere. And the king insisted that they ride against each other. First time, they got away with it. Second time, Gabriel's lance shattered. Piece of wood went into the king's eye. It didn't kill him outright. He lived for about a fortnight afterwards. It was really quite gory, actually, because there was a very well-known physician in France called Paré, Dr. Paré, and he decided he could save the King of France's life by operating on the eye, but he'd never done it before. So he decided he would practice a bit on some of the prisoners in the Bastille. All those efforts came to nothing. Just before he died, the king pardons Gabrielle, but the Queen of France, Catherine de' Medici, wasn't very pleased, as you can imagine. So Gabriel decides he will make himself scarce. He comes over to England, one of the places he visits, meets all sorts of influential people, including Sir Arthur Champernowne, and he converts to the Protestant faith, goes back to France, becomes a very, very prominent leader, a general in the Huguenot forces in those wars of religion. So his daughter, Roberta, as we call her, she grew up there against that background of war, traumatic childhood. Her mother takes her on the campaign trail with her father. All the children are there in Rouen when there's a siege. And after all of that, eventually, when she's about 18 years old, Roberta marries Sir Arthur Champernowne's son, Gawain, and comes to Dartington to live. I'm not going to say what happens next because I want people really to read the book to find out what her experience was in coming to England. And actually, she came more or less as a refugee. And Sir Arthur, after the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, he's going to welcome all of her family to Dartington Hall as refugees for a while as well. So fascinating period of history to research. Absolutely incredible.
Is it Dartington Hall?
It is.
Is it? Does that come under English heritage then, or is it?
No, it's run by a trust. It's a fascinating place. Champernownes lived there until 1925, and it got into a bit of a dilapidated state. The family were running short of money, and they sold it to a couple called Elmhurst, to Dorothy and Leonard Elmhurst, who set up this amazing social experiment there in the 1920s and 30s. It went on for a long time. Dorothy, she was the third richest woman in the United States of America at that time. And she married Leonard Elmhurst, who came from a gentry family from Yorkshire. His father was a vicar, and they always thought Leonard would also become a vicar, but he had other ideas. He was very interested in the rural economy and agriculture. He went to America to study agriculture at Cornell, met Dorothy, and on the third time of asking, she accepted. They looked for a property where they could have this experiment, which would revive rural economies, but would also bring together the arts and culture and the community. And they arrived at Dartington on a wet afternoon in November, saw the potential, and they bought it, and they ran that for a long, long time. Dartington's now run by a trust, and it's a visitor venue, events venue, and has the most wonderful Grade 2 listed gardens. And I'm a guide there, so I often lead tours around the gardens, talk about the history of the place.
Might have to come down and have a look at it one day.
You must come and visit.
I'll come down and have a look, because I do like going around these older places. That's why I was curious, whether it was still open to the public or whether anybody still lived there or anything like that.
All sorts of enterprises. There's a hotel. There are lots of places you can eat if you come to spend the day there. And it's also a wedding venue, events venue. Fantastic place. Can't recommend it highly enough.
I'll try and pop down sometime.
Great.
But uncovering the stories of those who left their mark in Devon truly highlights the diverse history of the region. Now, your research has also taken you to some fascinating places, including a village with a rather unique historical treasure. And another visit took you to the village of Bitton. Now, St. Faith's Church is what is there, but what's so special about the Bitton altar cloth?
Oh, I can't tell you how much it meant to me to actually visit Bitton, because I'd actually seen the altar cloth and studied it when it was on display at Hampton Court Palace a few years ago. And Bitton and the altar cloth really brings together for me a lot of my interests in history. because as you mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned earlier, but I also create and research historic costume, and I travel all over the West Country now. You said I'm a speaker. Well, I make appearances, I think we like to say.
I did say you were a seamstress.
I'm a seamstress, exactly. So, yeah, so I make and create these clothes. I'm fascinated by what that leads me to find out about people's lives, actually. It's amazing where studying costume takes you. But the link with Bitton is really interesting because not only was this piece of cloth hanging on the wall for generations, been used as an altar cloth, that's now been traced, and we're sort of 99.9% sure it is a piece of a gown worn by Elizabeth I, probably the one she wore in her rainbow portrait. But it's also the home of one of the women who served Elizabeth I for a very long time, and that's Blanche Parry. And Blanche rocked Queen Elizabeth in her cradle. She carried on serving her. And actually, in 1565, she took over from one of the Champernowne family as chief lady of the bedchamber to Queen Elizabeth I. And that link was really important to me. And it was really moving to see. Actually, when I went to Bitton, I have to tell you that they haven't got the original on the wall now. They've got the most wonderful, wonderful digitally created replica. But I have seen the original as well. So that's being kept and conserved very carefully. It's held by Historic Royal Palaces at the moment, and they have done some work on it to study it. During lockdown, I was actually able to join a group from a group called the Medieval Dress and Textiles, MEDATS, Textile Association, who were studying online the altar cloth. We had lots of photographs. What was really wonderful from that was when you look at the back of the cloth, the colours are really still very vibrant, so you get a really clear idea. And people were working through to identify all the different plants. It's got embroidered with plants and herbs and little animals. It's just a wonderful thing to see. If you ever get the chance to see the original, it's wonderful. But next best thing is Bitton, because they've got this replica on the wall, and there's also a really interesting monument to Blanche Parry and Queen Elizabeth I.
Sounds fantastic. I will. It's another place I'm going to have to come down and have a look at, isn't it? You know,
It's a little bit wild in Herefordshire, but it's worth persevering.
Now, discovering the significance of this cloth, I guess, adds yet another layer to our understanding of history and its hidden treasures. Now, let's turn our attention to a really exciting development for yourself. Now, your journey in bringing history to life has just taken another big step forward. And the really exciting news is that you've just signed a deal with Pen and Sword. So what book have you got planned?
Well, this is a really exciting opportunity. I was looking for my next target, I suppose, for a historical fiction work. And one of the people who keeps pushing their way to the front of the queue is the other, I suppose we could call her the other Katherine Champernowne. She's a very well-known woman. She joined the household of Queen Elizabeth when Elizabeth was only a little girl, and served her very well-known as a governess. And everyone knows her absolutely. I started to think about how I would write a story of her life, and I realized that I had an awful lot of information that was tending to push me towards a slightly different view of this woman to the one that's generally accepted. And I just realized I had far too much to put into an author's note into a fictional book. And it's just brilliant that Pen and Sword are now going to give me the opportunity to share all I've discovered about this amazing woman in a book later on. So we're working on that now. I've got a few research loose ends to tie up, but that's my next big project. She's a fascinating woman, and she is the sister of Catherine I wrote about in A Woman of Noble Wit. And there's been an awful lot of confusion over the years about exactly who this woman was, but I think we've now nailed it. She's definitely a daughter of Sir Philip Champernowne, and these two women were sisters.
And there's not a massive amount of information about her, is there?
Well, her early life is very difficult. I mean, she's like most women of her time. They leave a very light footprint on the record until Cat suddenly erupts into the household of Queen Elizabeth I. I mean, but I think we've built up a view of Cat, but there's lots of people still call her, that doesn't quite marry up with the way I've been thinking about her. It's on that as well. Sorry, let me have a sip. Yeah, we call her Cat. Lots of people over the years have called her Cat, but of course, we're not really sure that that's what Queen Elizabeth actually called her. Elizabeth wrote very recently about this, and I think the prevailing view is that we will actually think we'll call her Kate, not Cat. And that appellation, which everyone has been thinking was a pet name that Elizabeth had for her, is probably just a misinterpretation of an abbreviation in something that was written. One of the problems we've got researching these people is that we haven't actually got their voices. We've only got what's done.
How long was she actually with Elizabeth? How many years?
Yeah, she joined in 1536. She joined the household, and she, on and off, there were some times when she was sent away and she wasn't there. But when Elizabeth came to the throne, she was promoted to this incredibly influential position as Chief Lady of the Bedchamber, and she was there until Catherine died in 1565, very suddenly. And all the records suggest that the Queen was absolutely devastated when she died.
It's amazing, really. And it's something that I guess a lot of people will look forward to reading because, like you say, there's very little information out there about her. There is some information, but there is, if you can really get into the kind of the nitty-gritty of her life story, I'm sure it'll be a massive success.
There's a lot of information. A lot of it's a bit confused. So I hope I'm going to be able to dispel that confusion and encourage people to really take a new look at this woman and see her in a new perspective.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. And I guess securing a deal with Pen and Sword, it is an incredible milestone and exciting to see what's next on your journey. Now, with so many projects on the go, it must be a challenge to step back and carve out some time for yourself. So for those that don't know you, you do make some of the most impressive Tudor clothes that I've ever seen. So what first got you into becoming a seamstress?
Oh, my goodness. Well, this all started when I volunteered with the National Trust, and that was, probably best part of 10 years ago. And that was at a small property in Devon called Compton Castle, the home of the Gilbert family, where Catherine's first husband, his family home. And when I arrived, the National Trust said, the Gilberts were doing well in Tudor and Elizabethan times. Would you like to make a costume? Well, first I did some sewing when I was very young. When I was at school, that was a great way to have more clothes in your wardrobe and you didn't have to spend so much money. But all the years I'd spent in the civil service, I was working up in Whitehall. I was writing speeches for ministers and I was trying to stop them saying the wrong thing and things like that. I hadn't done any sewing. But, I thought, well, I'll give it a try. It can't be that difficult, can it? But, of course, it is. It's quite complicated business. I often say to people it's more like engineering than dressmaking. But I was determined to persevere. And the more I learned, the more I wanted to know because, I suppose I really wanted to know what it felt like to walk in those clothes, to literally walk in their shoes. And that meant I had to know how they were constructed, what they were made from, where the fabrics came from. And it led me down all sorts of avenues of research. It's been such a fascinating journey. And of course, it links to my writing because it helps me then to understand these women's lives, what it felt like to be in those places, walking in those clothes. As a writer of historical fiction, it's great because there are things I can't write that I wouldn't have realised if I'd never dressed in these clothes. I can't have one of my women running up a spiral staircase carrying something because you literally can't do that when you're managing all these skirts. So, yeah, there's crossovers with the work. It's been a fascinating journey, absolutely brilliant. But as you say, time is the enemy, I think, at the moment. It's hard to find time for all of this. And the speaking engagements have absolutely snowballed. I'm all over the West Country now. I go down to Cornwall, across the other side of the Tamar, my goodness, and up to Somerset, Auburn, all through Devon. And would you believe, last year I made nearly 60 appearances. And the diary is pretty much as full this year. So fitting that in is hard. Sewing is my relaxation. I love hand sewing. I love embroidery. And I've been teaching myself blackwork embroidery, which was very, very in Tudor times. But it is a challenge finding the time for it all. So we have to sort of fix the priorities a bit more and decide what's most important. And I think probably for me the next year, that is going to be Catherine Ashley's story.
They are fantastic creations, and I've seen you, and especially if people watch that episode of Time Team, they'll see you dressed in one of the creations there. And I was in Peterborough just a few weeks ago for the Catherine of Aragon Festival, and there were ladies there dressed up in the attire of the time, and they are amazing costumes, aren't they? And you can see the amount of work that goes into them as well. It's incredible.
Absolutely. And that's something I've discovered. But it's been really interesting to find out who was actually making them. And lots of the clothing for the wealthy women was coming from tailors who employed lots of journeyman tailors and apprentices. And you start to learn about their lives. It's absolutely fascinating.
Were the ladies in waiting, was their clothing completely different to the higher ranked ladies of the court?
Not really, no. I mean, there were fashions at the time, and there were times when, like Queen Elizabeth I at one time had a preference for her ladies in waiting appearing either in black or white. And she very much wanted them to be sort of the backdrop of her magnificence, I think. But they weren't those sort of restrictions. And people throughout society, women throughout society, did their best to copy the latest styles. And they came from Spain sometimes from France, sometimes from Italy, and these different influences coming into change in the costume all the time. And that goes for the men's clothing as well, not just the women's.
And it's never really changed, has it, in respect of clothing? Because there's always eras where we have different fashions and styles. And I guess it was the same in those days as it is today.
I guess there's one thing that was quite different in those times, in that people were very much bound by the sumptuary laws in terms of what they were supposed to wear, depending what station they were at in life. So unlike now, we can pretty much free to choose how we present ourselves to the world. There were quite a lot of restrictions through those laws that kings and queens kept having another go at to find who could wear what in terms of what fabrics, what jewels, what furs they were allowed to have, depending on where they were in status terms. So that was a difference for us. It's, nowadays, it's quite often that the same style of clothing is worn by people when they're sort of very wealthy or not so wealthy. I mean, blue jeans are a great example. aren't they? Because I'm sure we often see the Princess of Wales wearing blue jeans, and I might wear a pair of blue jeans. She might pay a bit more for hers than I do for mine, but it's exactly the same look, isn't it? Which is a little bit different, yeah.
It is. Now, with so much going on in your life, how do you find time to relax and take a well-earned break away from all the Tudor studies, books, clothing, research and everything else? So, what do you do?
Well, I'm lucky to live in Devon and I love my garden. And anybody who follows me on social media will see lots of pictures from my Devon garden. I try to carve out some time for that throughout the year. Believe it or not, I've still got an allotment as well. So I go at the top of the hill, miles out of the village. It's my quiet place, my place of retreat. I go up there and spend time away from everyone and listen to the birds sing. And I try to keep that going because it really is a wonderful relaxation. Gardening's great therapy for anyone.
Do you ever go on a holiday anywhere?
Usually our holidays end up being a tour of castles and big houses and National Trust properties. And I'm very lucky my husband goes along with that. And we've got families sort of scattered throughout the country. So we have this joke that every summer we go on Progress and we visit
Progress.
a bit like Elizabeth did. We visit my son in Wales, and then we travel around and we go. I've got another son in Yorkshire. Last year we had a fantastic holiday. We went on up into Northumberland and we went across to Holy Island, Lindisfarne, and had a weekend there. And that's a magical experience. Absolutely brilliant. And I took my embroidery with me, of course.
Of course you did. Just in case it rains or anything like that.
Absolutely.
Anyway, now it's time to talk about Rosemary. So where can people find out more about you, your information about your books, the Tudors and any other social media sites that you'd like to share?
Right. So the best place to start is my website, which is rosemarygriggs.co.uk. And you'll find lots of articles there about me. There's free articles I've written over the years about Devon history and about my costume work. There's also information and a bookshop which advertises my books. You can get them in all good bookshops. You can get them online. They're all available as Kindle and also as Audible books. So you've got all those options there. There's also a link to a newsletter if people want to keep in touch. I send out a newsletter every couple of months, and you'll find links to all my social media. I tend to post a lot about my costume work on Instagram and Facebook, and I'm also on throughout social media, everywhere you look for. Best ways to find those links is go first to the website, and there they are.
And don't forget, everybody, all of Rosemary's links will be in this description box below. So, Rosemary, it has been an absolute pleasure looking into the world of 16th century Devon ladies, the Tudors, and so much more with you today. Your passion for uncovering these stories and bringing them to life is amazing. And I know our listeners will have learned so much from your insights. So thank you for sharing your knowledge, your research, and your enthusiasm for history, because it's been a fascinating conversation. And I, for one, can't wait to uncover what's coming next after all we've talked about.
Oh, thank you so much for talking to me today, John. It's been an absolute pleasure and lovely to meet you. And I would look forward perhaps to chatting again sometime.
Certainly will. And as always, to everyone who's tuned in today, thank you so much. Now, we've still got some more incredible guests coming on History Speaks. So if you love history, you'll love History Roadshow. And don't forget to like, which is one of these, subscribe, hit that bell notification so you never miss any of our historical stories. So until next time, keep exploring the past with us, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.